The sheriff's cruiser kicked up a cloud of dust as it rolled to a stop at my front gate. Through my security camera feed, I could see Karen wildly gesturing toward my property, her face contorted with rage as she shouted at the two officers. Behind her stood a group of neighbors clutching water bottles and hiking poles, all of them staring expectantly at my locked gate. I never thought I would need to defend my own private property from an invasion force led by my homeowners association president. The security system chimed again as Karen marched the officers toward my front door, her finger jabbing the air with each emphatic word. My hands trembled slightly as I gathered my property deeds and legal documents. 5 years of peaceful country living had come down to this moment, a suburban dictator trying to use law enforcement to force her way onto my land. As the doorbell rang, I took a deep breath and straightened my shoulders. Karen thought she could bully me into submission by calling 911 over a closed gate on my own property. But she had no idea who she was dealing with, or how thoroughly I had prepared for this exact confrontation. That knock on my door was not the end of my peaceful life. It was the beginning of her downfall. The morning sun filtered through the oak trees, casting dappled shadows across my front porch as I sipped my coffee and gazed out at my 12 acres of paradise. I had purchased this ranch 5 years ago after spending a decade saving every spare dollar from my accounting job. The property was everything I had dreamed of: rolling hills in the back section, a small stable where I kept 2 rescue horses, and a natural creek cutting through the east side that attracted all manner of wildlife. It was my personal sanctuary, away from the noise and constraints of city living. When I bought the property, the real estate agent mentioned there was a small homeowners association that governed the rural development of 20 properties in our area. She assured me it was mostly inactive, primarily focused on maintaining the single shared road and preserving property values. The annual fee was minimal, and for the first 4 years, I barely noticed its existence beyond the occasional email about road repairs or the annual summer barbecue. Everything changed 6 months ago when Margaret Wellington moved into the blue colonial house at the entrance to our community. Within a month of her arrival, she had somehow maneuvered her way into the position of HOA president after the previous president relocated for work. At her first meeting, Margaret, or Karen, as the neighbors soon began calling her behind her back, announced her vision for elevating our rural community to meet modern standards of excellence. The first changes seemed innocuous enough. New flower baskets appeared along the community entrance road. The neighborhood bulletin board received a fresh coat of paint. Karen instituted monthly rather than quarterly meetings to foster greater community engagement. I attended the first 2 monthly meetings, but quickly realized they consisted primarily of Karen presenting her latest ideas while expecting immediate approval. I first noticed something was wrong when I returned from a weekend visiting my parents to find unfamiliar tire tracks on my gravel driveway. Thinking it might have been a delivery driver lost on the rural routes, I dismissed it. But the following weekend, I discovered a family I had never seen before having a picnic near my creek, a good quarter mile onto my property. "Excuse me," I called out, approaching them with a friendly but confused expression. "I do not think we have met before. Are you friends with one of my neighbors?" The woman looked up with a smile. "Oh, we just moved into Oak Ridge Community last month. Karen told us about the beautiful nature trail and said everyone is welcome to enjoy it." My stomach tightened. Nature trail on my property. The husband pulled out his phone and showed me a post from the community Facebook group. There was Karen, standing on what was unmistakably my private trail along the creek, captioned, "Enjoying our beautiful community nature trail. Open to all residents for hiking and picnics. What a wonderful amenity we have." I tried to remain calm as I explained that they were actually on private property, my property, and while I did not blame them for the misunderstanding, they would need to pack up their things. The family seemed embarrassed and quickly gathered their belongings, apologizing profusely as they left. That evening, I scrolled through the community social media pages and discovered dozens of posts from Karen over the previous months, all promoting our neighborhood trail and community creek access, with photos clearly taken on my land. Some posts showed groups of people I had never met walking along my creek or sitting on the large flat rocks that lined the water's edge. In one particularly infuriating video, Karen gave a tour of what she repeatedly called our community nature preserve, pointing out features of my property as if she owned them. The peaceful country life I had worked so hard to create was being disrupted by a woman who had appointed herself gatekeeper to land that belonged solely to me. I knew I needed to address this situation before it escalated further, but I had no idea just how determined Karen was to claim my private sanctuary as her personal community project. The next morning, I drove to Karen's house, rehearsing a polite but firm conversation in my head. Her blue colonial stood out from the other homes in our rural community, with its immaculate landscaping and decorative flags announcing the season and upcoming holidays. Karen answered the door wearing gardening gloves and a wide-brimmed hat, her perfectly highlighted blonde bob framing a face fixed with a practiced smile that did not reach her eyes. "Karen, I need to discuss something important with you," I began, keeping my tone even and professional. "I discovered a family picnicking on my property yesterday. They showed me your social media posts inviting community members to use what you are calling a nature trail on my land." Karen's smile did not falter. "Oh, is that what this is about? The community trail has always been there. Everyone uses it." "No, Karen. There is no community trail. That is my private property which I purchased 5 years ago. The creek and surrounding land belong to me, and there are no easements or public access rights in my deed." Karen removed her gardening gloves with deliberate slowness. "Well, perhaps your real estate agent failed to mention the historical use. Before these properties were divided, that trail was used by everyone in the area. We are simply continuing tradition. That may be true of the past, but legally, it is now private property. I need you to remove those social media posts and clarify to the community that the land is not public access." Karen's eyes narrowed slightly, though her smile remained fixed. "I think you are being rather selfish. We are all neighbors here. Community amenities benefit everyone, including your property values." "It is not about being selfish, Karen. It is about respecting legal boundaries. Please remove the posts." "I will bring it up at the next HOA meeting," she said dismissively, already turning back toward her door. "Perhaps we can formalize an easement for community use." "There is nothing to formalize. I am not granting an easement," I insisted, but Karen had already closed the door, leaving me standing on her porch with unresolved frustration. The following weekend, I spent Saturday morning installing clearly marked private property and no trespassing signs along my boundaries, focusing especially on the areas near the creek and trail. I placed 12 signs in total, making sure they were visible without being eyesores. I took photographs of each sign with my phone, documenting their placement and condition. At the next HOA meeting, Karen devoted 15 minutes to discussing what she called community beautification concerns, pointedly commenting on unsightly signage that has appeared in our otherwise natural landscape. She never looked directly at me during this thinly veiled criticism, but several neighbors glanced in my direction with confused expressions. When the meeting opened for community comments, I calmly explained that I had installed proper private property markers on my land due to increasing trespassing incidents. I clarified that while I appreciated our community, my property was not a public park or common area. Karen quickly redirected the conversation to upcoming summer activities, effectively shutting down any further discussion of property boundaries. As the meeting dispersed, a few neighbors approached me privately, admitting they had been confused by Karen's social media posts about community access and apologizing if they had inadvertently trespassed. The following morning, I discovered all 12 of my signs had vanished overnight. Only freshly disturbed soil remained where they had stood. I walked my property line, taking photographs of each location where signs had been removed. Near one location, I found a garden glove that looked identical to the ones Karen had been wearing during our conversation. I placed it in a plastic bag and stored it in my desk drawer, unsure if it would be needed but unwilling to discard potential evidence. That afternoon, my phone chimed with notifications from the community Facebook group. Karen had posted new photos of our beautiful community nature trail with a caption announcing a weekend group hike. The photos were taken from my property, in locations where my signs had stood just the day before. Most disturbing was the final line of her post. "Do not worry about those unfriendly signs. They have been addressed for the benefit of our community enjoyment." Several comments praised Karen for standing up for community access and not letting one selfish person ruin things for everyone. I felt a cold anger building inside me as I realized Karen was not merely mistaken or overstepping. She was deliberately orchestrating a community campaign against my property rights, positioning herself as the benevolent provider of access to land that did not belong to her. The unofficial community access to my private property had moved beyond casual trespassing. Karen was now actively removing legal markers and encouraging others to ignore my rights. It was time to establish clear boundaries, both legally and physically. This was no longer just about privacy. It was about protecting what was rightfully mine from someone who seemed determined to take it by force of will. Monday morning found me sitting in the office of Elaine Matthews, a property attorney with 30 years of experience in rural land disputes. Her wood-paneled office was lined with law books and framed credentials, lending an air of authority that I found reassuring. I placed my property deed, surveys, and photographs of the removed signs on her desk. "Let me understand correctly," Elaine said, reviewing the documents carefully through her reading glasses. "The HOA president is telling community members they have access rights to your private property, posting on social media encouraging trespassing, and has actually removed your legally posted signs." "Yes, that is exactly what has happened," I confirmed. "And now she is organizing a group hike through my property this weekend." Elaine shook her head, her expression grave. "This is a clear violation of your property rights. Let us review your HOA covenant first to ensure there are no easements or access rights you might have overlooked." For the next hour, we pored over every document related to my property and the HOA guidelines. Elaine confirmed what I already believed. There were absolutely no easements, access rights, or historical use clauses that would grant the community any legal right to enter my property. "Your boundaries are clearly defined," Elaine stated firmly, "and the removal of your signs could potentially constitute criminal activity, destruction of property at minimum. I suggest 3 immediate actions. Document everything with cameras, send a formal cease and desist letter to the HOA board, and physically secure your property boundaries." I left the attorney's office with a clear action plan and a sense of validation that I was not overreacting. That afternoon, I ordered 8 weatherproof security cameras and scheduled installation for the following day. The system included motion detection features and would send alerts directly to my phone when activated. While waiting for the camera installation, I drafted a formal letter to each HOA board member, clearly outlining my property rights, documenting the ongoing trespassing issues, and demanding that Karen cease making false claims about community access. Elaine reviewed the letter before I sent certified copies to each board member, including Karen. The camera installation was completed by Wednesday afternoon. The technician placed cameras at all major entry points to my property, focusing particularly on the areas near the creek that had seen the most trespassing activity. By nightfall, my phone was already receiving alerts as nocturnal wildlife triggered the motion sensors, confirming that the system was working properly. Thursday morning, I received my first human alerts. A couple with a dog walked directly past one of my newly replaced "No Trespassing" signs and proceeded down the trail toward my creek. The footage clearly showed them reading the sign before deliberately choosing to ignore it. I saved the video file to my growing documentation folder. At the local market that afternoon, I noticed several neighbors averting their eyes or quickly turning down different aisles to avoid me. One woman I had previously been friendly with gave me a cold look before turning her shopping cart around. The sudden social chill confirmed my suspicion that Karen had been busy shaping community opinion against me. When I returned home, I discovered dozens of notifications from my security system. Reviewing the footage revealed Karen herself walking my property boundaries with 2 other women, pointing toward my house and gesturing animatedly at the locations where my cameras were installed. Their conversation was too distant to hear clearly, but their body language conveyed disapproval and determination. That evening, I received a text message from another neighbor, Jacob, who had always been friendly but kept to himself. "Thought you should see this," his message read, followed by screenshots from Karen's private Facebook group that I did not have access to. The posts revealed Karen's increasingly hostile characterization of me as someone who had stolen community land and was installing surveillance to intimidate neighbors. Most alarmingly, she had indeed organized a community trail reclamation hike for Saturday morning, encouraging everyone to bring friends and family to demonstrate our right to access our traditional community path. The final screenshot showed a comment from Karen that sent a chill down my spine. "If legal pressure does not work, social pressure will. No one person should be allowed to close off what has always belonged to all of us. Saturday, we reclaim what is ours." I thanked Jacob for the warning and immediately forwarded the screenshots to Elaine. Her response was swift and unambiguous. "This constitutes organized trespassing. You have the right to secure your property before Saturday. I recommend accelerating any security measures you were considering." With the planned reclamation hike only 2 days away, I knew I needed to act quickly. The legal boundaries were clear. The property was mine. Now I needed to establish physical boundaries that would make that reality impossible to ignore or circumvent. It was time to secure my ranch against what was beginning to feel like an orchestrated invasion. Friday morning arrived with a sense of urgency. I had made several calls the previous evening and managed to secure an emergency appointment with reliable fencing company, who agreed to begin work immediately given the circumstances. At 7:30 sharp, 3 trucks pulled into my driveway, loaded with fencing materials and equipment. Mike, the company owner, walked the property with me to finalize the installation plan. "We will focus on securing the main access points today," he explained, marking locations on a property map. The creek entry needs the most attention since that appears to be their primary target. We will install a 6-foot gate with digital keypad access here and standard 4-foot fencing along these boundaries. I nodded, feeling a mix of emotions, regret that such measures were necessary, but resolve to protect what was legally mine. How long will it take? With my full crew working, we can secure the critical areas before nightfall. We will need another day to complete the entire perimeter, but the main entry points will be locked down by evening. While the crew began measuring and drilling post holes, I drafted a formal email to the HOA board informing them of the security improvements being installed on my property. I attached copies of my property survey, deed restrictions, and relevant sections of the county code regarding private property rights. The message was polite but firm, making it clear that these measures were in response to ongoing trespassing issues and the organized trespass being planned for the following day. Karen's response arrived within minutes, laden with exclamation points and capital letters. You cannot restrict community access to established TRAILS. This is an outrageous overreach and violation of community standards. Any construction must be approved by the architectural committee before installation. Cease work immediately or face significant fines and legal action. I forwarded her response to Elaine, who quickly confirmed that the HOA had no jurisdiction over security measures that did not affect the external aesthetic appearance from community roads. The fencing being installed was well within my property lines and not subject to architectural review under the HOA covenant. Throughout the day, my security cameras captured multiple drive-by observations from neighbors, including 3 separate visits from Karen herself. During her final pass, she remained parked at the edge of my property for nearly 20 minutes, taking photographs and speaking animatedly on her phone. I continued documenting each incident, adding the footage to my growing file of evidence. By 6 o'clock that evening, the main work was complete. A sturdy gate now blocked the primary trail entrance near the creek, with private property and no trespassing signs clearly posted. 4-foot fencing extended in both directions for several hundred feet, effectively blocking casual access to the most frequently trespassed areas. The digital keypad lock provided secure entry while allowing me to continue enjoying my own property. Mike walked me through the completed work as his crew packed up their equipment. The gate is sturdy enough to withstand significant pressure, he assured me, and we have installed concrete footers at the base to prevent anyone from simply lifting it off its hinges. I thanked him and his team for their efficient work, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders as I tested the gate lock. For the first time in weeks, I felt my property was truly secure. That feeling was short-lived. At 8:30 that evening, a series of text messages began arriving from Karen. Remove that gate immediately. You have no right to block community access. The board will be imposing maximum daily fines until that monstrosity is removed. You leave us no choice but to take formal action. The final message arrived just before 10. This is not over. The community will not be denied what has always been theirs. I did not respond to any of the messages, instead forwarding them to Elaine and adding them to my documentation file. I set my security system to high sensitivity and tried to get some sleep, knowing the following day would likely bring confrontation. The security alert chimed at 7:15 Saturday morning. Through the app on my phone, I watched as Karen arrived at my front gate, dressed in hiking clothes and carrying a clipboard. Over the next 30 minutes, a crowd gradually assembled, 15 people in total, all wearing backpacks or carrying water bottles, clearly prepared for the previously announced reclamation hike. From my kitchen window, I could see Karen addressing the group, gesturing toward my property while checking her watch repeatedly. Several attendees appeared uncomfortable, glancing at each other with uncertain expressions as Karen's presentation grew more animated. At precisely 8 o'clock, my phone rang with a call from the county sheriff's office. "Good morning, sir," the dispatcher said. "We have received a report of an illegal blockage of community property at your address. The caller states there is an emergency situation regarding public access rights being violated. Deputies have been dispatched to your location." My heart raced, but I kept my voice steady. "Thank you for informing me. I will meet the deputies at my front gate." I gathered my folder of legal documents and property surveys, then walked calmly to the gate where Karen and her group stood waiting. Karen's expression when she saw me was one of smug satisfaction. She believed law enforcement would force me to remove my gate and restore what she continued to call community access. She had no idea that her decision to call 911 over a private property dispute was about to backfire spectacularly. 2 patrol cars rolled up my gravel driveway, dust billowing behind them as they came to a stop near the gathered crowd. Deputies Johnson and Rodriguez stepped out, their expressions professionally neutral as they assessed the situation. Karen immediately rushed toward them, clipboard in hand. "Thank you for responding so quickly to this emergency," she declared loudly, positioning herself between the officers and me. "This man has illegally blocked an established community trail that has been in use for decades. He installed this gate overnight without permits or HOA approval, creating a public safety hazard and denying rightful access to community property." Deputy Johnson, an older officer with graying hair at his temples, nodded politely but said nothing, his eyes moving between Karen, the gathered neighbors, and me standing quietly by my gate. Deputy Rodriguez, younger and more direct, spoke first. "We received a 911 call about a blocked community access point. Can you clarify who owns this property?" he asked, addressing the question to both Karen and me. Before I could respond, Karen thrust her clipboard toward the deputies. "I have brought the original community plans showing the traditional access path. This has always been community property, used by residents for decades before he purchased his lot. He cannot unilaterally restrict access to community resources." Deputy Johnson turned to me. "Sir, do you have documentation regarding your property boundaries?" "Yes, Deputy," I replied calmly, opening my folder. "I have my property deed, survey documents, and confirmation from my attorney that there are no easements or public access requirements for my land. I also have documentation of ongoing trespassing issues, including security footage of my legally posted signs being removed without permission." As the deputy reviewed my documents, Karen's voice grew louder and more insistent. "Those papers do not override decades of established community use. The trail has always been open to residents. He is being selfish and violating community standards." Deputy Johnson looked up from the documents, his expression still professional but noticeably firmer. "Ma'am, these papers clearly show this is privately owned property with no legal easements or public right-of-way designations." "But the community has always," Karen began. "Historical use does not establish legal right of access without a recorded easement," Deputy Johnson interrupted gently but firmly. "From what I can see, this gentleman has clear title to this property, with no encumbrances regarding public or community access." Karen's face flushed red. "Then he needs to grant an easement immediately. He cannot cut off the community from resources we have always enjoyed." Deputy Rodriguez stepped forward. Ma'am, property owners are not obligated to grant easements. That would be a voluntary action on their part. Then what about the HOA regulations? Karen demanded, flipping frantically through her clipboard. He installed this fencing without architectural approval, which is a clear violation of our covenants. HOA matters are civil issues, Deputy Johnson explained patiently. We do not enforce HOA regulations. Those would need to be addressed through your association's normal procedures. Karen's composure began visibly cracking. But he is blocking emergency access. What if someone needs to reach the creek in an emergency? Deputy Rodriguez's expression hardened slightly. Ma'am, what exactly would constitute an emergency requiring access through private property to reach a creek? Karen stumbled over her words. Well, water, fire, community, tradition. I need to remind you, Deputy Johnson said, his tone now decidedly stern, that 911 is reserved for actual emergencies. Using emergency services to resolve a civil property dispute is inappropriate and potentially a misuse of emergency resources. The gathered neighbors began shifting uncomfortably, several taking steps backward as the confrontation clearly turned against Karen's position. A woman near the back of the group quietly gathered her children and walked back toward the road, followed by two other families. This is not just a civil matter, Karen insisted, her voice rising to an almost shrill pitch. He is violating community standards and restricting access that has existed for years. You need to order him to remove this gate immediately. Deputy Johnson closed my folder and handed it back to me. Ma'am, we have confirmed this is private property. The owner has the legal right to secure his boundaries. There appears to be no easement or public right-of-way established here. He turned to address the remaining neighbors. This gathering is occurring at the boundary of private property. While you are currently on the public road portion, I must advise that crossing that gate without permission would constitute trespassing. Karen's face contorted with frustration. You cannot be serious. You are just going to let him block everyone out. What kind of community service is that? Our service is to uphold the law, ma'am, Deputy Rodriguez replied coolly. And the law is clear regarding private property rights. I will be filing a complaint with your supervisor, Karen declared, clutching her clipboard to her chest. This is an outrageous failure to protect community interests. That is your right, Deputy Johnson acknowledged calmly. You can file a complaint at the station. However, I also need to inform you that misuse of emergency services can carry consequences. I would recommend consulting with an attorney before pursuing this matter further. The remaining neighbors began dispersing rapidly, many avoiding eye contact with Karen as they returned to their vehicles. Within minutes, only Karen remained, standing rigidly by the deputy's patrol cars, her knuckles white around her clipboard. Deputy Johnson approached me one last time. Sir, your documentation appears in order, and you are within your rights to secure your property. If you experience further problems or trespassing, please do not hesitate to call the non-emergency line. Thank you, Deputy, I replied, genuine relief evident in my voice. As the deputies prepared to leave, Karen made one final declaration, loud enough for everyone to hear. This is not over. The HOA board will address this violation immediately. The deputies nodded politely but said nothing as they returned to their vehicles. Karen stood alone in the dusty road, watching as the patrol cars pulled away. Her carefully orchestrated community event had collapsed, her appeal to authority had backfired, and her credibility had suffered a significant blow. As she finally turned to walk back to her car, her typically perfect posture was noticeably diminished. I returned to my house, feeling vindicated but knowing that Karen was right about one thing. This was not over. The HOA confrontation was still to come. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for Monday evening at the community center. The email notification cited urgent security and access concerns requiring immediate board attention. I arrived 10 minutes early, finding the small meeting room already nearly full with neighbors I rarely saw at regular meetings. Karen sat at the front table with the other board members, shuffling papers and speaking quietly with the vice president. When the meeting was called to order, Karen wasted no time addressing what she called the selfish blockade of community resources. She stood at the podium with color-printed photographs of my property before the fence installation, highlighting what she repeatedly called historical community access points. For generations, residents of our community have enjoyed access to the nature path along the creek, Karen declared, her voice carrying the practiced tone of someone accustomed to controlling meetings. This tradition predates current property divisions and has been an understood community benefit since the original development. Now, without consultation or consideration, one homeowner has unilaterally decided to install barricades, preventing families from enjoying what has always been a shared treasure. She proceeded to display photographs of children playing by the creek, elderly couples walking the path, and even a community Easter egg hunt that had apparently taken place on my property before I purchased it. The emotional appeal was carefully crafted, positioning me as an antisocial newcomer destroying cherished community traditions. Furthermore, Karen continued, the unsightly industrial fencing was installed without proper architectural review or board approval, in direct violation of our covenant restrictions. Our bylaws clearly state that all exterior modifications visible from community property require prior written approval. When Karen finished her presentation, the board vice president invited me to respond. I approached the podium calmly, connecting my laptop to the projector as Karen returned to her seat with a satisfied expression. "Thank you for the opportunity to address these concerns," I began, opening my carefully prepared presentation. "I would like to start by clarifying the legal status of the property in question." My first slides showed my property survey with boundaries clearly marked, followed by the deed transfer history. As you can see, this land was purchased as private property with no easements or public access requirements. While previous owners may have allowed informal access, no legal right-of-way was ever established. Several board members leaned forward, examining the documents with increased interest. I continued by displaying the county property records, confirming the absence of any recorded easements or access agreements. Regarding the fence installation, I explained, the HOA covenant specifically exempts security measures within property boundaries from architectural review requirements. Section 7.3 states that security installations not visible from community roadways are excluded from review requirements. My fence and gate are located well within my property line and not visible from any community road. Karen shifted uncomfortably in her seat as I displayed the relevant section of the covenant that she had conveniently overlooked. But the most powerful evidence was yet to come. I have documented a systematic campaign of trespassing encouragement and property rights violations over the past several months, I said, advancing to the next slides. These social media posts show Ms. Wellington repeatedly mischaracterizing my private property as community land and actively encouraging trespassing. Murmurs rippled through the audience as I displayed Karen's own posts calling my land, our community trail, and organizing group activities on my property without permission. Several board members exchanged concerned glances. Most disturbingly, I continued, when I posted legal private property notices, they were repeatedly removed. I played a brief video clip from my security camera showing Karen herself removing one of my signs under cover of darkness, placing it in a large bag before moving on to the next sign. An audible gasp came from several attendees. Karen's face flushed deep red as she stared straight ahead, refusing to look at the screen or meet anyone's eyes. Finally, I would like to address the inappropriate use of emergency services, I said, playing the audio recording of my conversation with the sheriff's dispatcher. Calling 911 for a civil property dispute not only wastes valuable emergency resources, but potentially endangers those with genuine emergencies. The responding deputies confirmed that my property boundaries and security measures are entirely legal and appropriate. As I returned to my seat, the room remained silent for several long moments. Finally, the board treasurer spoke up. I move that we take a brief recess to consult privately on these matters. The board members filed into a side office, while the rest of us waited awkwardly in the main room. Karen remained seated at the front table, rigidly staring at her papers and ignoring the whispered conversations breaking out around the room. When the board returned 15 minutes later, the vice president took over conducting the meeting. Karen's motion to fine me for unauthorized fence installation was brought to a vote. That is 3 votes against, 1 for, and 1 abstention, the secretary announced. The motion fails. Karen gathered her materials with trembling hands, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. As the meeting adjourned, several neighbors approached me with apologetic expressions and quiet words of support. The community's perception had shifted dramatically in the space of a single meeting, and Karen's campaign against my property rights had been thoroughly exposed for what it was, a baseless power play built on misrepresentation and entitlement. The following Saturday morning, I was surprised by a knock at my front door. Tom and Sarah Wilson, my nearest neighbors whose property bordered mine to the north, stood on my porch holding a basket of homemade bread and preserves. "We owe you an apology," Tom said as I invited them in. "We should have questioned Karen's claims about community access rights from the beginning instead of just taking her word for it." Over coffee at my kitchen table, they explained how Karen had systematically built her influence in the community, positioning herself as the authority on all neighborhood matters despite being the newest resident. "She did the same thing in her previous neighborhood," Sarah revealed. "My cousin lives in Lakeside Estates where Karen used to be on the board. She was actually asked to step down after trying to force homeowners to remove personal gardens because she did not approve of the vegetable varieties they were growing." This conversation marked the beginning of a healing process within our small community. Over the next few weeks, other neighbors reached out individually, many expressing embarrassment at how quickly they had accepted Karen's narrative without verifying facts or considering my perspective. A special board meeting was called to address the fallout from the emergency session. Karen was noticeably absent, having sent a terse email stating she would be unavailable due to prior commitments. The interim president, formerly the vice president, opened the meeting with a different tone than previous gatherings. "Recent events have highlighted the need for greater clarity regarding property boundaries and community spaces," he began. "We want to ensure that private property rights are respected while also exploring legitimate ways to enhance shared amenities on actual community land." The meeting progressed with thoughtful discussion of potential community improvement projects focused on the genuine common areas, the small park near the entrance, and the picnic area by the community pond. Several neighbors proposed forming a volunteering committee to maintain these spaces properly rather than encroaching on private property. Near the end of the meeting, the interim president read a brief letter from Karen. Please accept my resignation from the HOA board, effective immediately. Professional obligations prevent me from continuing in this capacity. No apology or acknowledgement of wrongdoing was offered, but her absence allowed the community to begin moving forward constructively. As spring progressed into summer, I began rethinking my relationship with the community. While I had every right to maintain complete privacy on my property, I also recognized the natural beauty of my land was something special. After consulting with my attorney about liability concerns and proper protections, I developed a limited access program that would respect my property rights while allowing controlled community enjoyment. At the July HOA meeting, I presented my proposal. I would like to offer monthly guided nature walks along my creek trail, open to community residents by reservation. This would allow shared appreciation of the natural space while respecting property boundaries and privacy. The proposal was met with enthusiastic support. The newly elected HOA president worked with me to create a simple registration system that would maintain proper records for insurance purposes while ensuring the number of visitors remained manageable. I installed a new sign at my front gate: monthly guided nature walks, respectful visitors welcome with reservation. The first official community walk took place on a perfect Saturday morning in August. 12 neighbors joined me for a leisurely stroll along the creek, now appreciating the land with proper permission and boundaries. Children marveled at the minnows darting in the shallow waters, and several residents thanked me personally for sharing my property on my own terms. "This is actually much better than before," one longtime resident commented. "The trail is better maintained, and it feels good knowing we are here legitimately rather than through some vague claim of historical use." As for Karen, she still lived in her blue colonial at the entrance to the community, but had become noticeably less visible at neighborhood functions.